welcome star people to SAPM, your intrepid star guide, and this is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast, a podcast in which I discuss many different topics from the advantage point of it being a spiritual path. Today we're going to be talking about archetypal astrology, and in particular Jungian influenced archetypal astrology. Before we get to that, some housekeeping. There's a newsletter called the Daily Stargazer. It has a free and paid version. You'll find the link in the show notes. Also, if you like my Astroflow, please like, share, subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, but in particular on Apple iTunes and Spotify. With that being said, onward. Alrighty, so this is episode 2. In the first episode we talked about some of the archetypes. So here's what I'm going to do that I forgot to do in the first one, but let's get clear, okay? So, archetypes are as follows. Archetype is an idea, a symbol pattern, a character type that appears in stories from cultures around the world and symbolizes something universal in human experiences. And so an example would be the warrior, the teacher, the hero, the maiden, the good boy / girl. Those are all archetypes, as are the king, the queen, the sage, the elder, etc. Now, Jung has a very strong influence on archetypes. Jungian archetypes are a concept from psychology that refers to a universal inherited idea, pattern of thought, image that is present in the collective unconscious of all human beings. Okay, so some of the key insights about Jungian archetypes, as they might refer to archetypal astrology, is Jungian archetypes are universal symbols and patterns that influence human behavior and personality. Key archetypes, as I've said, include the hero, the shadow, the anima and animus, and each representing different aspects of the psyche. The psyche itself is also an archetype. The word psyche derives from a word in the Greek that means soul. Understanding these archetypes can provide insights into personal development and help navigate life's challenges, which is the whole point of the exercise. Okay? And so today we're going to talk about the personal planets, and by which I mean the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Okay, so those are the inner planets, and so we're looking at a dance of identity. I'm really getting into and getting out of dance metaphors. I was a dancer once, but they seem a little, it's an interesting interplay here. But anyway, the sun and the heroine / heroine, that's the self, and that's the point of creative expression. So in a chart, archetypally, but even in a standard chart, the sun is the self. And that's the point of creative expression. Not to be confused with the ego, which is an aspect of self, but not the self particularly. The self is a organized idea of how we see ourselves that appears to be more fixed than it really is, because reality is not fixed, it's not absolute. There is a lot of diversity of expression, and all of those diversities of expression, depending on the time, the place, will have cultural support or cultural disapproval. Okay? So the moon is the nurturer. This is how we nurture ourselves and others, our safety and our security needs. And so this is how it might show up in your life. We're looking at new moon and full moon. You'll find out moon phase-wise, those are the two most common phases. Those are archetypal. The new moon is the fool. A page, if you study tarot, for example, those would be new moon energy. It's the beginning of a journey when you don't have all the information, you don't have all the ideas, where you might be more restless, more naive. It's very much like Aries energy. Aries energy is archetypal, okay? And that archetype is going where angels fear to tread because you don't know any better. So new moon energy is just not as illuminated and not in the know, not as experienced, as it were. And so archetypes that are similar to that would be Aries energy, the Aries archetype, the Fool, or any of the pages if you study tarot, for example, or the number 1 if you're a numerologist or have a numerology interest. There's also the full moon. Now, full moon is a culmination point. It is where the moon is most illuminated. You can see the craters with the naked eye. So you can see things. So it's an area of experience and knowledge, but a little bit much, very intense kind of energy, okay? And so when we're looking at full moon type energy, that's archetypal too. And we're looking like midpoint energy. So Cancerian energy, because it's about, being in the know, being experienced, being illuminated, illumination being wisdom, knowledge. So a sage, perhaps, elder energy. It's kind of an energy that you would see more as like middle-aged energy, or more toward you're in your 30s and you're suddenly very clear. Sage energy is how I would see the new moon. It's lit up, but the thing about light is it blinds you. It makes it hard to see things. Yes, you can see things, but too much light can be just as disorienting as too little. And so full moon energy is coming into itself. It's coming into its own, as it were. And so I would see it less of a king or a queen type archetype and more of a knight type archetype, just starting to come into itself, just starting to understand itself. So I would see it as more like adolescence or young adulthood. That's a better one. So young adulthood would be full moon energy. You know enough about yourself to be dangerous, but you don't know everything yet. Things are illuminated, but you still have to make sense of it. So that's that type of energy. Now we're looking at cosmic messengers. Well, we're going to look at Mercury, the trickster, first. And here's why. Because the messenger is an archetype. And you will see that archetype in plenitude, particularly in Greek myth, because Hermes was the messenger of the gods. That is an archetype. And that is bringing ideas, bringing wisdom, bringing knowledge, however it comes. That's what messengers literally do. Okay? And so that is one of Mercury's archetypes. The second is that trickster. And this is intellect and communication. That's what Mercury is known for. And that trickster energy is clever, bright, and knows just enough to be dangerous, but does not know everything, and sometimes gets itself in trouble due to overcompensating. If the moon is involved, so moon Mercury would be the energy of overcompensating. That's what that archetype would be about. So it's the thinker and the nurturer. So thinking, the emotionally intelligent or self-aware person would be moon Mercury, aware of the emotions and aware of how one thinks and how those emotions can impact thinking. So Mercury, the trickster, like I said, bright, clever, can talk themselves in and out of trouble. That's the trickster part. A little shady, promising things, making things up without checking for the facts. That's also very knight type energy. That's how I see it. But it's also the mage archetype in tarot, for example. So I'm bringing you'll notice a little bit of tarot in there because tarot is rife, filled with plenitude with archetypes. Now, Venus is about connections and values, and it's the art of relating. Okay, so that archetype, the relator, the harmonizer, the lover, the beauty, the artist, etc. Those are some of the archetypes commonly associated with Venus. Mars is assertiveness, defense, and motivation. Mars is the warrior. I don't have to say more, but I could also say protector and guardian, particularly if that Mars is in connection with the moon. Moon and Mars is the protector, the guardian. They're protecting something, like a dragon protecting sacred esoteric knowledge, for example. Sounds like a great story, by the way. And so when we're looking at these particular archetypes, starting from the sun going all the way to Mars, those are the overview of it. So let's go back and we'll look at the sun, the self. So if we're looking at the sun and Mercury, that archetype would be definitely the self, and that would be the self-narrative. What do you think of you? What do you think of, what do you think of you? What do you think of your self-expression? So the thinker meets the self, telling a story about yourself, the storyteller. You should also consider Mercury energy to be the storyteller as well. And if we're looking at the moon and our safety needs, the moon is the nurturer. It is the mirror. If we're looking at the moon and the mirror, and we have Mercury involved in that process, the stories we tell about others are really about ourselves. So the narrative, the thinking, storytelling narrative, so we've got the thinker or the storyteller, Mercury, in an aspect, meaning talking to, conversing with the moon, the mirror. Now we've got projections. The story that this energy would tell is that a lot of the stories this person is going to tell are going to be subjective and personal because they are dealing with projections. And the stories they tell of others are usually stories that they really think or tell about themselves. And if you've got Mercury and Jupiter, which are opposing type energies, we've got projecting, others projecting. So we've got the thinker going up against the sage. And we can also see this as teacher, student archetype. So Jupiter the teacher, Mercury the student, those two archetypes playing together to come up with that type of relationship. That's the relationship, that's the connection. A teacher-student. And the best teacher-student vibe is when both learn from each other. The teacher is merely there to act as a guide, and the student has the freedom to ask any question as they like that interests them, and the teacher uses that information to guide the student along in a direction that is best for the student, not particularly what is best for the teacher. And so that is Mercury interacting with Jupiter, even though those two energies tend to oppose. And if we're looking at how these show up, like I said, all planets also have phases, but in particular new moon energy. So new moon and full moon energy, we're just looking at waxing and waning energies. And you can also take it further. And if that moon and that Mercury are talking, but the moon is further ahead, the slow planet is the shaper. That would be Mercury. So this is waxing energy. It's gaining intensity. It's on its way to fullness. Whereas if Mercury is further ahead, meaning let's say 13 degrees and the moon is at 11, Mercury is the slower of the two planets, and so this is a waning energy. And so the intensity is long past. It is no longer moving toward a full moon phase. It is moving away from the full moon phase back to a new moon phase. And so a little bit more cautious, assessing, reviewing, reflective type of energy, whereas going into waxing energy tends to be a little bit more impulsive, spontaneous, because they're experimenting, exploring, and that energy is trying to sort out what it's about. How do I work with my emotions as a thinker? How do I nurture myself? What do I need to say to myself? Because a moon and Mercury connection needs to talk it out. They need to talk about their feelings. And their feelings tend to change because Mercury is involved. So that's how some of those archetypes could play out. When we're looking at Mercury, that's how we're looking at it. Now we're looking at, let's say, Sun and Venus. We got someone who's a harmonizer, a diplomat, a peacemaker, an artist. Someone who would be more tactful. They're not trying to ruffle feathers or upset the waters. They want things to be pretty and beautiful in harmony. And I'm speaking broadly here, very broadly, very generally. Okay? This is not meant to be an incisive and descriptive and detailed review of how the Sun and Venus might communicate. It's going to change from chart to chart. This is just to give you an idea. So Sun and Venus having a nice little chat, peacemaking, harmonizing. How can I make things calmer? How can I build bridges? So if I'm looking at the Moon and Venus, this person would be as a safety measure, they would be interested in making things as pretty and as harmonizing and as diplomatic as possible. They'd be very accommodating, very thoughtful, maybe considerate, and probably a bit charming as a way of getting their needs met. If Mercury and Venus are talking, that charm is going to be used sometimes to get what one wants, because the Moon is involved. Moon is about, it's personal, subjective. It doesn't mean that the person has self-awareness. The Moon isn't particularly about that. The Mercury touching it can suggest self-awareness. Now, if we're looking at the Moon, like I said, and Venus once again, if that energy is Venus behind the Moon is at 9, Venus is at 7, that's waxing energy. It's coming into its fullness as a moon vibe. It's illuminating itself. It's learning and exploring, but it's on its way. It's going to make a lot of mistakes. It's going to overcorrect and be very waffly and oscillating and kind of hard to pin down, because exploring, experimenting don't really have enough information and the experiences to make choices or to make definitives or to say anything definitively about the self. Okay? However, if the Moon is ahead, if the Moon is behind at 7 degrees, and Venus is ahead at 9, that is considered waning energy, because the slow planet is ahead of the fast. Let me re-say that, okay? So, if the fast planet is behind, we're looking at waxing. And that's experimenting, exploring. We don't know enough yet to make any wise decisions based on values, ethics, etc. However, if the Moon moves past Venus and Venus is behind at 7 and the Moon is at 9, that is considered a waning energy, and that means that we're past the full Moon phase and more past the more experienced, self-assessing, a little bit more cautious. And so that energy would be more like I'm trying to harmonize as a way to stay safe and sane, but it also means in both cases a tendency to overdo it by people-pleasing, fawn response, because we have 4 major responses besides fight or flight. It's fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is one of the survival responses, making nice to the mucky mucks so that you can live to see another day. That literally makes sense. And so we've got the Moon, which is instinctual, and Venus, fawning, might become a way of staying safe, for example. And if we've got Moon and we've got Sun, Venus, Moon, Venus, let's do Sun and Mars. So if we've got Sun and Mars, we've got someone more warrior type energy, active. Let me get my hands in it. I'm motivated to get in there, roar, get it done type of energy. Also to protect, to defend in a gentler way and a bit more assertive, a bit fiery, like, grr, let me in there, let me take action kind of vibe. And Sun Mars is the warrior energy. It's definitely the strength. This person might be the pioneer, the trailblazer, restless feet that want to be in motion. Those are the archetypes I would give the Sun and Mars together. Moon and Mars, it would be a little hidden. We got safety, Moon, Mars, protecting of the emotion. That's where that hard shell in a crab or a exoskeleton in, say, for a Scorpio energy, a scorpion, it would be a little bit more protective. Why? Because they're motivated to protect themselves. And some of those protections might come out as projecting onto others our own emotions, because when Mercury is involved, we're projecting what we think onto others. When the moon is involved, which is about our emotions, we project what we feel onto others. If we're feeling a little uncomfortable, we assume that everybody feels uncomfortable, because we all have a universal logical fallacy in that we assume that everyone is just like us. Everybody, we all do this to a certain degree, everybody. That is part of the way of survival on the planet, is being able to see yourself and others in you as a means of being able to stay safe. So we've got the moon and Mars. That protective energy might show itself more subtly within protecting our emotions. But the drive is toward emotional intelligence. It is in, and sometimes moon, Mars, it also hidden motivations. Because the moon is a mirror, it can also be ambiguous. And that ambiguity, that hidden, that subconscious, because the moon is also the subconscious. The subconscious is an archetype that gives shape and form to those parts of ourselves that we don't see as easily, but that others allege or claim to. Because this is actually not an easy thing. Archetypal astrology awakens us to the fact that who we are is not a neat package. It's not neat, it's not nice, it's not pretty, it's not meant to be. It's very, very messy. And you'll notice the messiness of what I'm saying, because the edge of evolution feels messy. And so the moon talking to Mars, and that Mars is an arrow. You'll notice that it's a circle with an arrow pointing, because that's literally a finger pointing, I want that. That's it. Desire is what motivates most things. Not all things, but most things. And Mars is about desire. I want that over there. That's why it's pointing. And when the moon and Mars are talking, it's not always a comfortable energy, because Mars energy associates very strongly with Aries energy. And the moon is very Cancerian, and those two signs square one another. So it's a challenging energy, archetypally. It is the need to protect and defend our feelings and our inner world and our felt experience from the outside world, which sometimes tends to demonize, weaponize, deny, reject parts of our emotional experience that make other people unhappy, upset, uncomfortable. We all learn to we're all conditioned by our tribes, our families of origin, our caretakers, to hide parts of ourselves. And the moon also talks about what's hidden, what's ambiguous within us, which we can't see. And Mars, our motivations, moon Mars, our motivations aren't always going to be clear. They're going to be very messy and sometimes hard to sort. Now, if we're going to move back and forth, because I love mixing moon and Mars energy together. And let's look back and forth. So Mercury and Mars, we are motivated by desire. We have a strong desire to know. I want to know that. So we've got our warrior, our defender, our protector, out there motivated to learn, to know. And our thinker's like, yep, that's for me, thank you very much. And the shadow side of that is now our words can be used like weapons. They can be demonized, they can be weaponized, because Mars is a warrior. Mars is looking for tools. If it doesn't have a bow and arrow in hand, it'll create a symbolic one. So the downside of Mercury-Mars energy is that aggression, that assertion is going to be directed verbally at others. And once again, hypotheticals. That all depends on the chart, once again. But the thinker and the warrior might always be looking for a war, You might always see something as needing to be defended. So Mars and Mercury energy, thinker, warrior, the need to defend a thought, an idea, and sometimes to be verbally combative is another shadow expression. We've got Venus and Mars. We've got the lover going up against, the warrior. And these two parts of our chart is about, just that. Our passion and our lover coming together. And one is about relating, the other's sacred motivation, assertiveness, defensive motivation, etc., etc. And we got the lover going up against a defender. You might have a relationship or connection or relate, even if it's everything. We feel a relationship to everything because technically Venus energy is we are always in relationship to everything. Your distance to your family, to your job, to your friends, that is a relationship. In proximity to them, they're either close or they're far, that is a relationship. And how well we tend that connection, that's Venus energy. And Mars is, what do you protect? What do you defend? What do you care enough about to defend? What do you care enough about to protect? And in this case, relationships are important. Enough motivating action to maintain them and take care of them. And also sometimes, if you're going to create and sustain, there also may be the energy of destruction which Mars brings. Mars can be a highly destructive energy because anger can be healing or it can be destructive. Anger results in change in stagnant systems, but it also results in those systems being completely obliterated and sometimes irretrievably. So we have to use our Mars energy with wisdom. And we got Mars and Venus, how we relate and what we desire. We desire connections with others and we're willing to defend and protect them. However, we may go overboard either way because this energy can go to the opposite. It can go to the middle and any along that spectrum, that continuum, continuously. Okay? Let's see if there's anything I have not covered. Nope, I think I've gotten it. So, those are some of the things I wanted to share, about archetypal astrology. Now, the reason why, as I've said, archetypal astrology is very useful because archetypes are better and easier to tell stories about. You can tell a story about the thinker and the nurturer, the thinker and the mirror. Just think about it. The thinker, Mercury. The mirror, the moon. What projections, what mental projections and emotional projections, what emotionally motivated, what emotional projections do we have? Because we've got feeling, the moon, and thought, Mercury. All decisions are made emotionally first. So if we're looking at a mirror, we're looking at projections. And it reminds me of a story of Narcissus, who was a beautiful, beautiful human. And this is a Greek myth. And you'll probably find a similar myth in other cultures, who everyone thought was gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And one day, Narcissus sees their reflection in the water when they bend to get a drink. In one telling. And they are so overcome, so intoxicated by their own visage that they just stare, growing ever more enamored of their own reflection and bending even closer to the water until they fall in and drown. And the gods put Narcissus flowers in memory of Narcissus, one of their best love creations, because the gods did love beauty. Okay, they really did. So when we're looking at, as I said, that type of energy, we got the moon and Mercury, thought, thinker, Mercury, and emotion, the mirror, what we see mirrored, those are projections. Why I told the narcissist story is because sometimes we do get enamored with our own reflection, with our own projections, so much in fact that they become unconscious, because the moon is also a symbol of the unconscious. The unconscious is an archetype, which the moon represents. So we've got thought and emotion. We've got intuition and rationality, with these two energies constantly going back and forth. It's not always going to be comfortable. As I said, it's going to be quite messy. Okay, so that's it for this particular session. We're going to be going on next week, and we're going to step into Jupiter and Saturn and talk about these social planets as archetypes. Like I said, the whole key point to take away is that archetypal astrology is meant to illuminate. It's meant to allow self-reflection. Not too much self-reflection, but enough self-reflection where you shine that light and go, whoa, I didn't know that was a part of me. Oh, I didn't know I had that pattern. Or no, oh, I didn't know that mattered to me. That's the whole point, to know you, because I believe that only you know you. You're the only expert. No one can tell you who you are. Your experiences, your feelings, your thoughts, your opinions on you are valid. Other people are welcome to chime in, but their opinions, their thoughts are secondary to your own. The only caveat to that is if there is an injury, a health issue, etc., that makes that comprehension more difficult, then it's okay to lean on others. It's always okay to lean on others, so long as they consent and so long as you consent. But that's the whole point of this, is comprehension, to grasp yourself. And with that being said, thank you very much for listening. And until next time, keep your feet on the ground and your eyes to the stars. Peace and astro magic.